Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Andre Gregory, an actor, writer, producer, and director who is basically a legend. He founded the Manhattan Project Theater Company in 1968, where he produced Wallace Shawn's first play in 1975, and they continued that collaboration for decades, most famously on screen in Louis Malle's My Dinner with Andre, an art house sensation when it was released in 1981. The trio reunited for a modern dress interpretation of Uncle Vanya, filmed as Vanya on 42nd Street in 1994, that's probably the greatest screen adaptation of Chekhov I've ever seen. And that's just a sampling of Andre's work. He's also just published a marvelous book with Todd London, This Is Not My Memoir, which reads like an artist wrestling with his life, his career, his choices, and his contentment. I read it in a single sitting, and it was a profound pleasure to spend time in Andre Gregory's heart. Andre picked Casablanca, which has somehow never come up on the show before. Made in 1942, Michael Curtiz's studio drama stars Humphrey, Bogart, and Ingrid Bergman as former lovers drawn back into each other's lives in Morocco while the Nazi stain spreads over the world around them. I could run through its cast, I could rattle off its awards, I could tell you how many people cite it as their favorite movie, but ultimately it's Casablanca. Oh, one quick note, we recorded this in August, remotely obviously, and Andre had a little bit of a sniffle. He's fine, I checked. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I chose Casablanca because I've seen it 16 times.
Good a reason as any.
You know, it's always hard to say about a work of art, and I think Casablanca is a work of art. I was watching it the other night, and instructed by you, and
requested.
I was thinking, what is it that is so amazing about this film? You know, I have an early personal relationship to the movie because I saw it on opening day when I was 9 years old.
Okay.
And I'm sure anybody watching this program knows that very famous scene in Rick's cafe when the Germans start to sing aggressively a Nazi song.
Yes.
And Rick, with a tiny little look, gives the orchestra permission, and they lunge into La Marseillaise. Well, the day that I saw the film, the opening day, the entire audience got to its feet and sang La Marseillaise. You know, because we were, as I remember, the film began pre-production work just after the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be after the release of the film. It would be
at least. Wikipedia says, and I did check this, that it opened. It had its world premiere in November 1942 in New York and was released nationally in the U.S. January 23rd, 1943.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been pretty fresh.
So America and the world were at a terrifying place when this film was released. Nobody could have known that the Nazis would have lost the war. Nobody could have known that America would have made this huge effort to build tanks and planes and an army, you know. And if we had lost the war to Hitler, and Philip Roth, I guess, has written a book about that.
Yes.
We would have been up Schitt's Creek. I mean, it was terrifying. It was really terrifying. You know, we lived in Paris until 1939, I think. And the famous lights, the lamps of Paris, you know, the lights that go over the bridges and the lights, you know, those lights went out when the Nazis entered Paris. And there was a feeling here that we would never see those lights go on again, which was a tragic feeling. So we were at a crossroads. We were at a place of little hope, great fear, and this movie came out that truly made us hope there was hope. Yes. Not know there was hope, but hope there was hope. You know, so that was when I actually first saw the movie. And I'm sure since movies are your thing, you know, there's no real way to ever say, why do we love this movie? You know, Some Like It Hot is one of my favorite movies of all time. But nothing comes near Casablanca.
I wonder if it isn't that you were that young and that the experience was that raw of the moment. I mean, I was born in 1968. I didn't get to see it until, I guess it would have been at least 40 years later. I don't think I caught up until the early 80s when it first came out on videotape. I didn't get the chance.
So you must be younger than me.
A little. It's the hairline. I can see how you'd be fooled. But yes, I'll be 52 when this comes out, and didn't get to see Casablanca until my teens, and would have related to it then only as an old movie. I liked it. It was strong, but it felt like what it was supposed to be before any of the context was added. It felt like a good studio picture with great performances and a terrific pace and a good script. And I appreciated all of that. And it wasn't until I got older that I was able to really plug into. And I've said this once or twice before. You need to have your heart broken a couple of times before you really understand this sort of movie. And it sounds silly, but it's true. It's
true.
It's all theory until you have it happen to you, and then you can see it in the actors' faces. And it wasn't until my wife and I watched it the other night, and she hadn't seen it in probably 20 years, and I saw it most recently in Washington, actually. Warner flew a bunch of journalists out to the opening of the Smithsonian's movie theater in 2011, and they screened their new restoration of Casablanca, and I had the experience of watching it with some idiot behind me doing all the dialogue. And I was going to murder him. I got angrier and angrier. It took me completely out of the film. I could admire the restoration, and I knew the movie well enough that I could still sort of see how it had been improved visually. The shadows or this lighting had been restored. And then I turned around, and this gentleman would have been in his 70s. He clearly loved it so much and was also clearly in some sort of senility. And it made me sad that I had been angry at the interruptions, that he was taking so much comfort from it. And that was something that kind of turned my head around too, in a way that I'd never experienced that in a movie theater before, that situation of suddenly going from rage to empathy.
Do you know about the audiences that would go to Casablanca and repeat the dialogue?
Just along with it, or in call and response? Yes.
Oh, for a long time. I remember when I was at Harvard, the Brassel Theater played Casablanca forever. And young audiences would go just so they could shout out the dialogue, so a whole audience would be shouting, "Play it again, Sam." They'd be shouting, "What are the problems of three little people, only come to a hill of beans in a world like this," whatever it is. Yeah. Round up the usual suspects.
Really?
Oh yeah. It was an underground, for a while. It was an underground classic, like the Rocky Horror Show.
I did not know that about this film in particular. And it seems, it was fairly won Best Picture and Director and Screenplay. It was quite well regarded at the time. I didn't think it would have that kind of cult life, but I suppose it's a way of reclaiming it, isn't it? Taking it off the pantheon and making it yours again.
I think for about 10 or 15 years, there were young audiences that would go, and shout, "Here's looking at you, kid," just before he said it, Yeah.
Oh, God, it would have been awful to try to see that for the first time with that audience, but I suppose.
But I have a story about, in relation to your interruption. I went.
It wasn't you.
No.
Okay.
I went to MoMA to see maybe Grand Hotel with Greta Garbo.
Okay.
And I was sitting next to two women who kept talking in the movie. And this woman in front of us kept going, turning her head. And finally she turned around and she said, "Could you please be quiet?" And it was Greta Garbo.
If anyone has the right.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to come up with something clever there, but that's just such a perfect New York moment too. I can't top it. I do love the idea of revisiting something that you've built and it wasn't the movie that made her an icon. She was already an icon by the time she made Grand Hotel, but just to see it, just to go and see it in a theater, just a lovely opportunity and a strange choice.
Well, when you mention going to see it in a theater, of course, most of the theaters, well, we don't go to any theaters now.
No.
But most of the theaters, of course, have small screens. And mostly we watch movies at home. But when we did our film of Vanya on 42nd Street at the Toronto Festival, we won the audience prize. And the prize for winning the audience prize was that you got to see your movie in the largest movie theater in North America. There were 5 balconies. And as I was looking up at the Vanya that I knew so well, that I'd seen so many times, that I directed, at these huge images that were almost impossible to put together with reality, it struck me yet again that film is a dream medium, that the images are dreams, but they have to be on large screens for them to be able to show us that they're dreams. And I think one of the really interesting things about Casablanca is that it's a dream film. It has strong political overture, especially for us now.
Sure.
But the way it's lit, the way it's costumed, the sets, the light in the turret of the airplane thing that keeps going around. We're in a dream.
And it's a dream where everyone does the right thing. Everyone acts conscientiously, except the Nazis, but they do what they think is best. And it's a kind of a pleasing, comforting illusion of, not even illusion. It's a comforting story of Americans doing the right thing to turn the war around, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, from a studio's perspective, it's gold, right?
Yes, but it came out just after the Hollywood studio heads had refused to stop doing business with the Nazis because there was such good business to be made in Germany,
Swell.
And they were Jewish, and of course, Lindbergh was a popular figure. Was it Father Coughlin, who was
he was around? Yeah, the moral screedster. How would you describe Coughlin?
I think he was a neo-Nazi.
Yeah, he was pretty much, wasn't he? Before they needed to be neo.
Yes. It's hard to remember now, was that Madison Square Garden had an event filled with Nazis, American Nazis.
Yeah, Marshall Curry has a 6-minute documentary about that floating around on Vimeo and YouTube.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
It's just the footage, and it was nominated for an Oscar 2 years ago, I think. And it's absolutely chilling. Nothing about it feels, other than the quality of the cinematography, it could be happening right now.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so, a film saying, this is wrong. What's going on in Europe is wrong. And we have to do each in our own little way. That's something that was very moving for me watching the film, because as we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people marching for Black Lives Matter right now, and there's the whole question of voting is crucial. There's never been an election as crucial as this. The actions of three little people do come to a hill of beans. If you're out there in the streets demonstrating, or if you're trying to make some kind of change. Because America had been very self-indulgent, did not want to go to war. And this movie was saying, you have to have a moral compass.
Yeah, and Kate and I were talking about this after we watched it the other night, and I cannot picture this working with Reagan in the lead the way he was originally touted for Rick Blaine.
God,
and
no.
You need someone hard. You need someone like Bogart who had come up playing villains and heavies. You need to believe there's a chance he won't do the right thing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the thing that I realized as I was watching the movie the other night is I was never a fan of bullfights, but I did go to a few bullfights.
Okay.
And of course, with a bullfight, the bull will enter the ring. And you're pretty sure the bull will be killed. So the plot is known. But what's thrilling, if you like bullfights, is how the thing is played. So just as poor Ingrid Bergman didn't know, I don't think until the last day of shooting, whether they were going to get on that plane or not, which I gather was quite confusing for her. Watching the film, I don't know if you had this feeling. Every time I watch it, I think, well, maybe she'll stay with Bogey.
Well, you want her to, don't you? I mean, we want that.
No, a very common event, if you want to call it that, is that most of us have known love and lost it, even when we were quite young.
Sure.
And there's something, because how much those two love each other. And the fact that she does not stay with him and that he makes her leave is heartbreaking every time.
Yeah, I think the thing that I find so compelling about it, and this time more than most viewings, was that you see the negotiations. You see everybody saying what it is they want to do, and everyone's constantly stating their objectives and desires, because everyone in Casablanca is playing something off someone else, and it's all these rotating tables of temptation and seduction and force, and people are constantly imposing their wills on one another. And then Ilsa's decision, whether it's conscious or not, to let Rick decide. I mean, a couple of recent reviews, essays have said that it makes her a passive character ultimately, and that it makes her weak. But if you read Rick's version of it at the end, she's giving him the out of, I'm just trying to seduce you for these transit letters. And they're both willing to abandon their love for the greater cause. It's just that she never comes out and says it in the film. It's all just subtext, but Bergman is acting it. It's so clearly there that she doesn't want to be doing the thing she's doing, and she doesn't want to betray her husband. She also doesn't want to leave Rick.
I think she gives one of the most subtle performances There was a Bergman movie, Autumn Sonata. I thought she was amazing in Autumn Sonata, but in Casablanca, she's really extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, she's doing all of that within the structure of a studio picture that doesn't have any time for it. I mean, the movie does. Curtiz knows what he's getting from her. The way every scene is paced, the way that the camera is, she's constantly being given the glamour shot with the soft focus. And if you just look at her eyes, there's so much there.
Yeah.
And her hesitations. Yeah. I guess that's what I keep thinking about. When I first saw it, I thought, it's a great studio film. And now it feels almost like it escaped from the system, that the low angles and the lighting feel almost expressionist. There's this sense that more than most, certainly at the time, you get the feeling, and it is like, ultimately, it's not just a feeling, it's true that almost everybody involved with this has a stake in the story. And there are so many European refugees in the film, working on the film. There's a sense of the shadow of real life creeping in. We were really surprised with how many times the phrase concentration camp is thrown around. But then I realized that it wasn't until after the war that people really redefined concentration camp as a death camp.
Yeah.
And everybody's just talking openly about it because, of course, they're all in Morocco and it's the 40s. They would know, the early 40s. They know what's going on.
Yeah.
And then...
Yes, I was once in Switzerland for some reason, and I visited, I don't know how this happened. I had tea with a man who had been the head of the Red Cross in Switzerland during the war. And he told me that before he had been the head of the Red Cross, he had visited the German embassy for something. And he'd walked into a room by mistake, and there on the wall was a map of all of the concentration camps. And when he went back to the United States, he tried to persuade people that this was happening, and nobody would really believe him, except Eleanor Roosevelt. Sure. When you were talking about the low angles and, those costumes where everyone who's good is wearing white and everyone who's not good is wearing black, and Bogey is wearing black tie. So he's in the middle there. I have always felt, I paint a lot now, and I've always felt that great film is about film. Painting is about paint. What I mean by that is that there was a painting I always loved at MoMA, a Gauguin of 6 or 7 little puppies having a bowl of milk. And I just loved that painting. And I would generally think, how adorable, the story of some puppies drinking milk. No, the painting is about painting. It's about the nature of paint. It's about how the colors of each puppy go together. And I think something unusual about Casablanca is it's about the nature of black and white 35 millimeter film itself. We are literally seeing in the lighting, the costumes, the sets, the nature of film, the nature of great black and white film.
I wonder how many people only have seen it digitally. I'm just trying to think of the last time I saw it projected on film, and it's probably...
I've had a lot, yeah.
Probably the 90s.
I was very privileged I think they only did it for 1 or 2 seasons at Radio City Music Hall. For a couple of years, they had a season of great American classics on that huge screen. And one of them, of course, was Casablanca. And I'd always been impressed by the dialogue and the acting in Casablanca, but not about the production effects. And when I saw it on that large screen, one thing I realized, amongst many things, was that the only time the two of them, Ilsa and Bogey, share a light together is when they're in Paris. Once Paris is over, they are always in separate lights.
I don't know that I'd ever caught that.
I'd never caught that until I saw it that big and you couldn't miss it. You know, something else I thought about as I was watching the film is I read a brilliant piece in The Atlantic. I think it's written by a woman whose name is Applebaum.
Okay.
She's a very fine political writer.
And Applebaum.
Yeah, maybe.
Is that possible?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't know her. And she was asking the question that so many of us have asked. Why are the Republicans acting the way they are? Why are they so despicable? What's behind that? You know, and some of us have thought, well, they want to win an election. They're scared they won't win an election. Or, you know, they're in it for the money. She's calling them collaborators. And they're collaborating with Trump. We have a fascist dictator and a party that is collaborating, which is a despicable thing to do, to collaborate. And of course, Casablanca takes place at the center of collaboration, where there are free French, Vichy French, Nazis, people in the middle. But collaboration is a very big issue in the film. And I think it's one of the things that makes the film very relevant for now.
Yeah, I kept trying to think about the analog for the present day, if there is a way to tell this story in the present. And I don't think there is, just because the middle ground has disappeared. The idea that someone could pretend to be Rick, that Rick could be, you know, Switzerland and stick his neck out for nobody and have no one bother him. I don't think we have that anymore. And there was a recent attempt to resituate the story. Have you seen Christian Petzold's Transit? It's 2 or 3 years old.
Yes.
German film.
I think I did. Yeah.
The genius of it is that it is essentially the story of Casablanca, but it's modern dress. It takes place in an unambiguously present day. But it's...
Oh, well, then I should see it again. I must see it again.
Oh, it's wonderful. I think it's on the Criterion Channel if you've got that. I'm sure you do.
I do.
Of course. It's the only way in, because you're constantly reminded that all of these issues are absolutely relevant to the present, and everything in it is fresh, from the question of collaboration and the questions of personal and political morality. Everything is happening right now. It never stopped. All of these stories are still very, very real. But I think you need, or at least now we need, Casablanca to take place in the past, because it's easier to imagine a better ending. I don't know that we can have that now. I mean, if you do, like now we're living in the Hill of Beans theory, because even if Laszlo and Ilsa get out, there's another set of media ready to shout them down. You know, the idea was in 1942 is if he gets to people and tells them his story, that it will change the course of the war, because he's such a dynamic figure. And I love the fact that Paul Henreid and Bogart hated each other on set, because he is playing someone who is just such an... Every time I watch the movie, I feel a little more sympathetic towards Laszlo, who has to live with the knowledge of all these things that could have happened and didn't for him to get away. But he's playing it as someone who just doesn't have time for any of it. Mm-hmm. That, you know, it's a small cut. He wraps a dish towel around it. He'll be fine. It's just everything is an irritation to the mission. And I don't know that I would believe that he would be embraced in the present, like a figure like that would be embraced in the present day, because we keep watching people come up and tell the truth and get shouted down.
Well, I have to disagree.
Please inspire me.
What about that extraordinary Swedish young woman.
Greta Thunberg.
Yes. You know, um, she in her way, I think, is as powerful as Laszlo. She's a potential leader who could perhaps change something in the world, or at least inspire others to become like her. Did you know Howard Zinn? We were friends. We were neighbors on the Cape. And when Bush was elected a second time, my wife Cindy and I were so in despair that we went over to have breakfast with him. And we said, Howard, we don't know what to do. And he said, well, there are two things you can do. His answer was quite surprising. He said, one, make your art, because art in times of darkness brings light. And he said, two, get out in the streets and demonstrate. Nothing of importance, he said, is ever changed or passed in Washington without action in the streets. It was action in the streets that created the Voting Rights Act. It was action in the streets that ended the Vietnam War. So if we're going to ask ourselves, what do we do now? No, we probably can't be Victor Laszlo. It probably wouldn't have any effect. But we can be out in the streets. We can be voting. We can be keeping our mask on.
Yeah. It's, again, it's remarkable to me that world history has brought us to a place where people are seeing the idea of caring for other people as a political statement with which they disagree. But here we are. And it seemed, maybe that's part of it too. It just seemed, the evil seemed clearer in the olden days, in the days of World War II. You could point to it's such a, I think it is my favorite line. The Nazis wore gray, you wore blue. It's just such a clear division, and it's
it's a great line
and cynical.
Great line. But can we say that Trump is less evil than a Nazi? He's killed hundreds of thousands of his own people. He's destroying climate change. He's a racist.
I don't disagree with any of these things. My issue with Trump is that I have so many, but I think the worst thing about Trump is that he's doing all of this incidentally. He doesn't really, there's no plan. He's just in opposition to a bunch of things. That was his strength as a political candidate, and he's got no interest. We in Toronto, we went through this with Rob Ford in 2010, and then with his brother Doug. They're perpetual campaigners, and they're perpetually aggrieved. They don't have plans. They don't have goals really, other than self-enrichment and making their friends comfortable. They just want to complain on the biggest stage possible, and that does absolutely get people killed. Through neglect, through poor policy, through the strengthening of racist law enforcement and public policy and all the things that already existed. They're here to make everything worse, but it's not their goal. They just want to yell and have attention be paid to them. And Trump, because he's also very proud that he's never hired anyone smarter than he is surrounded by all of these ghouls. The Stephen Bannon.
So was Hitler.
Exactly. Well, I was going to say, they're the ones whose policies tend to be the most horrific, and Trump will sign off. I suspect will sign off on anything that sounds like something he agrees with. But what you get are these short-lived bursts of destruction. But they ultimately, they're a virus that burns itself out. Throughout history, the dictator movements don't last very long unless they get really lucky, like Chile.
But boy, can they cause a lot of trouble.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it's just watching America, watching a country that I am part of, even if I don't live there, and that I believe can survive almost anything. But you never want to see that theory tested. It's just been awful, and this is going to come out in October and we're recording it in August. And I have no idea what that landscape is going to look like in 2 months' time.
None of us do.
It is literally unthinkable that I could think of America and not know where it's going to be, how many people are going to be dead, how many tanks will be in the streets, you name it, because it's already started to happen.
But that was true of Europe at the time that Casablanca takes place. Nobody, the two get on a plane and fly to America, but will they accomplish anything? You don't know. Rick and Louis, are walking down the tarmac, and they're going to join some kind of organization to fight for a free France. But will they succeed? The important thing, I think, is to take an action, no matter how small. I think we have to say no to evil when we see it. And that's what's so moving about the Black Lives Movement. I also had a personal relationship to Casablanca, because as we didn't leave France until 1939, we actually, well, you might know this from reading my book, we left on the last boat train to London before the Germans invaded Holland. We were outfitted for gas masks. We crossed the Atlantic on a small freighter whose sister ship was torpedoed. So when I see Ilsa and Victor Laszlo on that tiny little plane going into the fog, I don't even know if they'll land.
Yeah. I suppose it's the attempt, as you say. It's the attempt. The gesture is in the trying.
We must make the gesture.
It also feels as though, for all the scope of it, the fact that all of these massive world events are turning around the characters and turning on the characters' motions and choices, we never see any of it. There's some stock footage at the very beginning of Nazis marching, and that's it. Other than that, there's half a car chase and a little bit of racing around in the dark streets, but it's always about the individuals. It's always about this handful of people. And there's, I think, 22 speaking parts in all, and everyone gets a moment to be defined. And
many of them were refugees.
Well, yes. And that's that thing about La Marseillaise, is that it's informed by people who were actually invested in that song. It's not just an acting job.
And we're seeing Casablanca now in a time that abhors refugees.
Yeah. Yeah. That was definitely a thought. This film is the product of people who, I was trying to keep track of it. Curtiz had come from Hungary. Peter Lorre fled the Nazi regime. Somebody else. Of course, Conrad Veidt, who plays Major Steiner, who became famous for playing Nazis, was one of the German actors who resisted them most ferociously before he left.
Yeah. And Leonid Kinski, the little barman, slim barman, he was a refugee from the Soviet Union. And Madeleine LeBeau, who was in tears singing the Marseillaise. I think she got out of France just as the Germans were coming in.
I think so too. And someone else too. There was one, I looked it up and made a note and I forgot it. Oh, Kurt Bois, who plays the pickpocket, Jewish German actor and refugee.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is invested in a way. And Claude Rains, of course, was English, and English had already been part of the war. And it just feels like this one moment where all of this could have happened. And the alchemy of the film is so strangely noble. I don't know how else to explain it. But
that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. I have watched Casablanca half a dozen times from top to tail and pieces of it elsewhere. And this last time is the only time I've actually cried. And it was at the Marseillaise, and it was just so inspiring. And it's ridiculous. I've seen this film. I know this scene. It's probably the most famous scene. I know the story about Curtiz just catching a shot of Bogart nodding because he couldn't figure out how he wanted him to react, and just a day later or a day before, I'm not sure when, but said, like, would you just take this, like, while we're doing this one thing, would you just take a shot and nod? And that's the nod, because it doesn't mean anything, because that's how easily Rick can do it.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't care. And without that scene doesn't work. But with it, oh my God, I was in tears, and that's never happened before. And that's because I'm different. The film is exactly the same.
Yes.
That's the great, I mean, that's what I love about cinema. You have dreams, and I have the knowledge that I'm a different person every time I revisit something, and that so is everyone else. I know I've told this story on the podcast before, but a friend of mine, the late critic John Harkness, used to say that his favorite film was The Rules of the Game, because every time he watched it, he would identify with a different character. Because this time through, someone else would have a point.
Yeah.
And I love that about the art form. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it works with theater as well, right? Because the stories don't change. It's the audience is different and changing.
Yeah.
But I suppose the evolution there is in the performances and in the interpretation.
The performances, yeah.
And this is fixed in time.
If one goes to see a Balanchine dance, you know how it begins, you know how it ends, you know every step in it. But each time it's different because you're different.
Yeah. Well, in the interpretation, in this case, right, you're watching an artist who can't help but do it their own way.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're, for all of our attempts to recast Casablanca or update it or make it modern, there will never be another combination of Bogart and Bergman. That just, it's literally impossible, but it is also so remarkable to watch happening in the moment, and the fact that the editing creates tension where there may not have been any before. That just the orchestration and the construction of this film is so miraculous.
Bogart isn't even quite as great with Lauren Bacall, and he's great with her.
Yeah,
but somehow those two, Bergman and Bogey, yeah.
I think it's because her default mode in the role of Ilsa is pleading, and his is reserve. And so you have the purest version of want and desire from her, and the purest version of I cannot do this, partially because it's my personality and partially because of spite. And watching, we never get the moment where Rick changes his mind. We don't get to see it. And I think that's incredible. Knowing on second, third, and fourth viewings, you can look for it and you'll never find it.
You'll never find it, no.
That right up until that moment, there's a chance he'll refuse. Or he'll go with her, or he'll betray both of them.
Yeah.
And he never tips his hand. And it's just, again, I think about someone like Reagan, who, even when he played villains, needed to be liked in a way that Bogart doesn't.
Yeah.
And you just have this incredible force of opposition in Rick that Bogart finds, that he never gives. He's like, when Rick invites someone to sit and drink with him, they're surprised every time, because he's, all this history is communicated in his posture. It's nothing he does. It's all just there.
No, it's a great, great performance.
And Bergman's amazing too. I don't want to discount her at all. Neither of them is, and that was the other thing that struck me this time, was realizing maybe it's the speed with which it's performed, that all the dialogue is pretty rapid fire in the first half. Everything in the club moves very quickly. But I was thinking that it doesn't feel like anyone is doing, studio golden age movie acting that we're used to from that period.
No, it's something new that we haven't seen before.
It's not method.
No.
But it is naturalistic in a way that I don't think movies were prepared for at the time.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, The Maltese Falcon is a year and a half earlier, and it feels like it's from a decade before. It's got a hard, like a pulp noir quality to it. It's great, but it is very much self-contained. It's not playing out in the real world the way that this is.
Yeah. And I don't think many of us consider The Maltese Falcon, great as it is, one of the most beautiful films of all time, the way we do with Casablanca.
And it's just part of the continuity of Bogart that the two are constantly put together, I think. But even the films he made shortly after still feel older and more conventional somehow. Maybe it's the stagecraft and the fact that Casablanca was shot in Burbank, but it doesn't feel like it.
No.
You've got ceilings and roofs and space. It doesn't feel studio bound.
That's part of what makes it dreamlike.
There's one other film that I think about a lot because it's deliberately in the style of, it's a film called The Good German by Steven Soderbergh that he made, I want to say around 2005 or 6.
I don't think I know it.
Yeah, it's gone away. It's for one of his studio pictures that no one seems to remember. And it was the movie he made with George Clooney, Cate Blanchett, and Tobey Maguire. And his challenge to himself. Write this down. Oh, I'll email you. I was going to send you a link to the Marshall Curry thing, so I can just add it to the list for you. Wouldn't surprise me if that was sneaking around on Criterion as well. We should take a look. A film called The Good German, which was his attempt to make a studio picture about World War II, and it ends with a race to the airport, and it ends with people getting on. It is very much indebted to Casablanca, but the twist is that he uses profanity. There's nudity. It is a present day movie made in the style of. Yeah. And it's fascinating. I don't know if it works. I've seen it a couple of times now. And he even wanted it to be released in Academy ratio on video. And theatrically, I think it was matted at 166 to just feel smaller and older. And it's really interesting to watch a contemporary mind deal with a story like Casablanca about people making moral choices and changing their worlds on a romantic impulse, but also because the world needs them to. But what's really strange is watching a cerebral filmmaker try to tell that profoundly emotional story and just not quite getting hold of it. Yeah. And I think the difference is that, Curtiz has skin in the game. The Epsteins had skin in the game. Everybody making Casablanca knew it was an important film. And
did they know that when they were making it?
I think you can feel it. I think the conviction is there. The studio didn't treat it any differently until they saw it, right? That was the legend of it. It was it just came up out of the system. But this unproduced play had some spark that changed after Pearl Harbor, and everyone responded to it. And maybe, there's so many movies that were made at that point in time that are kind of empty patriotism. Like everything John Wayne did was demonstrative patriotism, making a story that shows people how important the war effort is. This movie never even mentions the American war effort because it started. They said it deliberately in December of 41. But it's all about that. It's the greatest recruitment poster for civil service I think I could imagine coming out of World War II. Did it? I mean, you were 9. How did it land? What came for you? What was the thing you took out of your first experience with it? Do you even remember?
No, I was 9.
Yeah,
I was 9.
All this stuff would have gone past me as a kid too.
Yeah, I just don't know how much I knew, but there was a lot. There was a lot in our family that related in a way indirectly to the film. For instance, my father and mother had many relatives in the Soviet Union, and they wanted to get them out. I think this is in my book too, maybe.
You touched on it, yeah.
And they wanted to get them out before they left France for England. And there was a little office in Warsaw where you could go and you could haggle over human beings. You could say, I will give $10,000 if you let my uncle leave the Soviet Union. And they would say, nothing less than 20,000. How about 15,000? So the letters of transit were something I can really identify with.
And you were aware of that as a kid? That was being discussed. I'm a generation or two older, but I definitely had the dinner table Jewish, like the dinner table Zionist experience. Is how I've been describing it, where people talk about Israel in an abstract term, but this would have been during, and then you look back and realize, I was 5 and that must have been during the Yom Kippur War and I wasn't even aware of it.
Right.
But I think Casablanca works that way because it is about people in rooms instead of a war theater. There's no larger scale. It's just down to individuals and individual decisions. We've talked about this. I don't want to repeat it for the podcast, but it's so intimate and so immediate that way. Maybe that's it. Maybe the connection is because it's not a big war movie. It's just about people.
The other thing that I was thinking when I watched it the other night is, for me, it has the quality of a fairy tale, even though it's about very real, life-changing, serious issues. There's a kind of fairy tale aspect about Rick's place and the Vichy police, and I don't know, I had a feeling of a fairy tale.
Yeah. Is it because Strasser never actually does violence to anyone, and he's sort of an ogre in a way that he's?
Could be, yeah.
I kept this time through. I was surprised that the Nazi violence is just non-existent. They're simply there as a threat.
Yeah.
And ultimately, Rick kills Strasser, but again, that's an unambiguous heroic act that he also has no choice. He's boxed himself in that way. It's what allows the plane to leave. It's what lets Rick and Louis run off to the resistance. And it is the first action that Rick takes. Even letting them go and giving them the letters isn't really an action. It's sort of an agreement.
Yeah.
And it's, this is a movie that takes 98 minutes for Humphrey Bogart to do something. And when did that ever happen? That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's an odd question to ask of you now, but the podcast tends to angle back towards influences, and I'm trying to figure it out from your work. I don't really know how it might, but just in case it does, is there anything of Casablanca that you have used or borrowed or stolen entirely for your own work?
Well, I would say the only thing is in all of my productions or films, every single actor is terrific.
And that's on you.
Doesn't matter how big the role or how small, I don't know if that was an influence, but I was, we lived in Hollywood during the war, and I was very influenced by Hollywood actors because I knew some of them. I knew Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone and the Marx Brothers. And, so Hollywood movies were kind of a part of my childhood. But no, I don't. I wouldn't say, well, I went into the theater to direct musicals, and somehow I went astray. But a very strong thing in me, whether it's directing a play of Wally Shawn's or Beckett, or entertain. Keep entertaining the audience, not for any kind of cheap reasons, but because you're a storyteller. And when you're a storyteller, you have to keep the audience on the edge of their seats.
My thanks to Andre Gregory, whose new book, This Is Not My Memoir, is available now from Farrar, Straus & Giroux. Thanks also to Nicole Dewey. She knows what she did. Andre's on Twitter at the Andre Gregory, all one word, and it's great. And of course, you can find Casablanca on Blu-ray and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment in a multiplicity of special editions. It's also available on Apple TV and Google Play, and streaming on HBO Max in the US and Hollywood Suite in Canada. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting a bunch of podcasts these days. Go check them out. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network. I'm really enjoying Paradigm, a new series hosted by Stephanie Phillips that's never quite what you think it's going to be. Stay inside, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out. I'll see you next time.